This is Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode, we have Emily Myers, who is running for Seattle City Council in the 4th District. How are you today?
I'm good, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a beautiful sunny day. We're recording this on Tuesday on the 26th, so it is just beautiful out there. So could you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and maybe your experience?
Sure. So I am currently a PhD graduate student at the University of Washington, where I do research on Parkinson's disease. And I'm just finishing up this year, so I'll be graduating. And I am a executive board member with UAW 4121, which is the graduate and postdoc union at the University of Washington, where we represent over 5,500 graduate students, academic student employees, and postdocs. And I'm also in the leadership for Seattle 500 Women Scientists, which is an organization that focuses on public scholarship, equity in science, and bringing scientifically informed solutions to our city and our communities. And then I've also founded the Washington Science Policy Network, which is a network of science advocates across the state that work to promote scientifically based policy and informed solutions at a state level and congressional level, actually, too.
So it sounds like you've been very involved in your community.
I have been. I think that being a scientist in the current climate means that we need to be speaking truth in public and reaching out to our communities to talk about science, to talk about scientific solutions to our problems, and to promote equity within side of science as well.
And so what made you want to run for office?
I'd been thinking about running for office for a while. And when the opportunity came up in District 4, I was thinking about it. I had talked to some of my labor contacts. And then ultimately my decision was made when the IPCC report came out on climate change, which was the report that said, we only have about 12 years to substantially address our carbon emissions. And I decided that, I spoke about being a leader in science, I spoke about being a leader in our community, and it was time for me to step up and be a leader myself.
It's kind of surprising how few scientists we do have in elected office. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, we have seen an uptick. I think there was quite a few scientists that ran for congressional seats last year. Thinking of like Kim Schreier and Joe Cunningham. So we have seen scientists start stepping up into political office and into the public sphere, which I think is really important and valuable.
And could you tell me a little bit about your district?
Yeah, so District 4 is, probably the biggest landmark in District 4 is the University of Washington, which means that there's a lot of students, a lot of graduate students and working families in the district. And then, there's then other parts of the district which are a little bit more residential, a little bit more neighborhood focused. And so I think that across the district, the big issues are going to be things like accessible and affordable childcare, which is one of the central platforms for me.
So what are some of the other big issues facing your district in particular?
So as I said, affordable childcare is really important in this district. There's a lot of working families, a lot of families in general. I was out in a neighborhood out in Ravenna the other day, and I was talking to a family where they had 3 kids, and the mother didn't actually end up going back to work because it just ended up being more financially feasible to stay home. Those decisions are, up to each individual person, but we need just in general more childcare, and we need to make sure it's accessible and affordable for the people around us, as well as making sure that those jobs. So I talk a lot about the professionalization of childcare, because childcare has historically been done by women, and especially women of color and immigrant women. So, and we don't pay very well for childcare, and I think that's really unfortunate. And speaks to how we value women's work. So we're looking to develop programs that help professionalize childcare that lead to careers instead of just low-wage jobs.
And how can the city help to do that?
So I'm looking at programs like what they're doing in Philadelphia right now, which is 1199C, where they're creating a program that both partners with organized labor and unions, as well as the community colleges, and to basically create a program, like a 2-year program that ends up with an associate's degree as well as a path forward to a career. So I think, in my experience working within labor and working within a lot of women's movements, we can really create those relationships and partner with the people that are already interested in doing that work, like people like Teresa Mosqueda and Lorena Gonzalez, who have done a huge amount of work on the pay equity and domestic workers' Bill of Rights.
And so what do you think are the biggest issues facing the city as a whole?
I think some of the biggest issue that I've heard from both my membership from UAW as well as across the district from talking to voters is housing affordability. Obviously, we have a growing city, and we are not building enough housing. So that's going to be really important. For me, I'm a renter. I pay 50% of my salary to rent. And, a survey last year of my own membership of graduate students showed that 82% of us are actually rent burdened, meaning we pay more than 30% of our salary in rent. So I think housing affordability is going to be the major challenge going forward. And it's a nuanced problem, and we really need to be thinking about it from all sorts of angles of equity and racial and gender equity, as well as how it relates to climate change and carbon emissions and transportation as well.
I am also a renter, and often I feel frustrated because oftentimes the dialogue is dominated by homeowners. So it's really nice to hear another renter entering into politics.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like 51% of our city is renters, and the only renter that we've had on the city council in the last couple of years has been Teresa Mosqueda. But I can check that number for you.
And how can the city help homeless folks?
So homelessness, I think people experiencing homelessness, again, that's a really nuanced and large conversation. My approach is from a harm reduction and evidence-based behavioral and mental health approach, because I think there's people who are experiencing homelessness for a lot of different reasons. And so there's not going to be one big solution that fits everybody. So taking a behavioral mental health approach is really important, and then addressing the opioid crisis going forward is also really important, and that's where my background as a neuroscientist and someone who strongly believes in evidence-based policy, I think is really going to be strong and necessary to address these problems.
Do you think the city has enough money to handle this problem, or do you think we should be looking at revenue increases?
I think that it's a twofold approach. I do think that we are going to be looking for new progressive revenue streams in the city. But I also think that there's some internal auditing that we need to be doing to making sure that we are, in fact, collecting the money that is owed to the city, as well as, making sure things are running as smoothly as they can and as efficiently as they can for everyone.
And what can the city do to help improve our transportation system? Right now, things are kind of rough.
Yeah. So personally, I don't have a car. I am a walker and a big fan of public transportation. So I think, there's some really great work being done already by community groups like the Mass Coalition, which is the Move All Seattle Sustainably, and the Transit Riders Union. I think they're doing some really important work around fare evasion decriminalization, which is an important issue for me because it's another way that we can help people who can't afford to take public transportation and make sure that they have access to it and that it's accessible to everybody. And then again, I think it's related to housing affordability, is making sure that we're building housing around our transit hubs. Because if people can access public transportation, then they're less likely to drive, which then reduces our carbon emissions and helps us save our city and our planet.
As far as fare evasion decriminalization, would you support free transit?
I would support free transit, yes.
What can the city do to improve housing affordability?
I mean, I think, so housing affordability, we need to be looking at the policies around ADUs. I think that's going to be really important going forward. I've talked to folks who have tried to put in ADUs or have done it, and the process is very complicated. And so really making sure that that's streamlined and that there's a good resource at the city for people who are interested in doing that. I also think that we could potentially be using incentive programs to help people put in ADUs that maybe cannot afford the upfront costs of putting in an ADU. And then that also helps protect against displacement as well. So looking at ADUs as a pathway forward, and then expanding our mandatory housing affordability as well, and making sure that we are, in fact, tackling housing affordability head on is super important to me.
So we live in very polarized times right now. What would you do as a leader to help bring people together in this city?
So we do live in a polarized society, but I don't think it's as polarized as it comes across. I think we do have a lot of shared values, and you can see that in the way that we're building coalitions across the city to tackle our biggest problems. Personally, for me as a scientist and a leader, I think that the divisiveness that comes when we have really strong opinions and values that are not grounded in evidence is where we're going to run into problems. So if we're basically drowning in a sea of opinions and values, what we really need is citizens who are informed and engaged. And so I think that's where my appreciation for evidence and my approach to our challenges is going to be vital going forward, to really base us and to build coalitions around data and evidence-based policies.
And are you accepting the democracy vouchers?
I am accepting democracy vouchers. I'm super excited about this program. Especially in District 4, where we have such diversity and wealth disparities. I think it's a great program that will give so many people access and an ability to participate in my campaign, including even the graduate students who were extremely low-paid workers, but even they are able to give $100 to the campaign through the Democracy Voucher program, which is really exciting for me.
Yeah, it's a really special program. I'm so thankful Seattle is doing it. It's amazing.
Definitely, yeah.
So if people want to find more information about your campaign, where should they go?
They can go to emilyforseattle.com, and for is spelled, or you can follow us on Twitter at emilyforseattle, and we're also on Instagram and Facebook.
I'll make sure I have all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.